cure in sight and hundreds more being diagnosed weekly, Alzheimer's is more feared than cancer or heart disease. Join us as David Levy breaks it down and educates, informs, and explains useful caregiver strategies and techniques that 25 years of non-clinical family caregiving have taught him. You can listen or call in and be part of the show. 888-565-1470 to ask your questions. And now, here's David Levy.
Good evening, Boca Raton, America and the world. And we're broadcasting to you tonight on WWNN 1470 AM out of Boca Raton, Florida. But for the rest of the world, you can see us on caregiverreality.com. Just click on live show and we'll be there. I'm looking at the monitor right now, so you can do the same. It's a pleasure having you here, and I have tonight with us a very special guest, somebody that I've known professionally for quite a while and is a good friend, and her name is Michelle Hollister. All right, she's managing partner of Solkoff Legal, probably one of the finest, if not the finest, elder law firm in the country, located in Delray Beach, Florida. And she is the new president of the National Guardianship Association. Is it guardianship or guardian?
Guardianship.
Okay, National Guardianship Association. And she's about to preside over her first national convention when?
October 12th in Tampa.
In Tampa. All right. So all you guardians, you're now cloistered under an expert. Knows it better than she does. And it's a pleasure having you on. And why don't we move right to, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea for the audience who may have heard the word but have no idea what guardianship really entails.
Okay.
All right.
It would be my pleasure. And, of course, thank you for having me tonight, David. Guardianship, and this is somewhat unpopular for me to say as president of NGA, but guardianship is something that we all want to avoid. There are excellent guardians in our area and in our country, but guardianship a lot of times can be avoidable. And as I explain to you the process, I think it'll become clear why we want to avoid it.
Okay.
Guardianship is a court process. The court becomes involved, and so because of that, it's time-consuming and expensive. There are many lawyers that are required, usually in the guardianship process, at least in the state of Florida. And it's quite intrusive because, quite frankly, guardianship is when somebody has to be declared incapacitated. Mm-hmm. You know, people tend to think, oh, I'm my mother's guardian or I'm my child's guardian. No, you have to go through a court process to be a guardian.
Let me ask you a question. If a parent wants to be a guardian for, let's say, a special needs child, all right, do they have to take do they have to go through a course to become a guardian, or does the fact that they're a parent automatically give them that status?
The fact that they're a parent does not automatically give them that status once the child turns 18. Up until 18, they're good to go. But once that child turns 18 and a guardianship is required, then they do need to go through the court process, and there is training that's involved. Now, parents don't have to go through as much training and education as a non-parent or a professional guardian, but there is education that's required.
Okay.
And so when you have this process of guardianship, it starts with somebody being declared incapacitated.
Right. And when you say incapacitated, you mean that they're not competent or that they're physically unable to do. Psychiatrists, lay people, who makes up a three-person committee?
In Palm Beach County, all of the above. The statutes in Florida allow for a doctor, a gerontologist, a psychiatrist, an RN, a social worker, and a lay person. And in Palm Beach County, the lay person component on the examining committee is utilized. In a lot of parts of the state, a layperson is not appointed, but the statutes allow for it, and it does happen here.
Without getting astray. Is this the same kind of 3-person committee that if you were to have somebody Baker acted because of an incompetency, they're a danger to themselves or other? Is this that same kind of evaluative process?
No, a Baker Act looks at very different criteria, and no, it is not. There are different ways that you Baker Act, and it would not be through the use of this examining committee.
Okay.
This examining committee is to have training geared towards incapacity evaluations for guardianship matters.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So these 3 people come and they meet with you and they run they conduct an examination based upon their expertise.
Right.
And then they file their reports with the court. Now, in keeping with the idea of due process, when that examining committee was appointed, the court also gave you your own lawyer, your court-appointed attorney, plus the person who filed the petition more often than not has an attorney.
Right.
And if there's a proposed guardian, they have an attorney.
Okay.
So right there, you should hear the cash register. In the
Right. I was going to say, you may not be in favor of guardians, even though you're president of the Guardianship Association,
Well,
but it sounds like attorneys enjoy it very much.
I am in favor of guardians, but it's guardianship. And as we talk this evening, you'll hear about how it is avoidable for a lot of our citizens.
Right.
So, and another point I'd like to make, because we are web-based and we may have listeners that are outside of Florida,
Right.
is that what I'm talking about is limited to Florida, and Florida is a leader in guardianship.
Okay.
We still have a long way to go, but we are far ahead of most states. The fact that we have this examining committee
Yes.
is tremendous, because in many parts of our country, a judge just looks at a piece of paper and reads some allegations and could say, yep, you're incapacitated.
Right.
This whole concept of examining committee is quite progressive.
So, for the benefit of our listening audience, what you're saying applies to a guardianship in Florida, and it should not be taken, even though you're not trying to practice law over the air,
Right.
but it really only applies to the state of Florida. But in general, it's also a good overall description of what the function is of a guardian and the guardianship process.
Absolutely, without a doubt. So in the state of Florida, you have this examining committee, and you have all these attorneys, and judges went to law school. Very few judges went to medical school. Very few are trained in evaluating capacity. So they rely on the reports of the examining committee. And so those reports hold great weight.
Right. Are they written in plain speak, or are they written in doctor speak?
It's a combination. Most courts use a form to help direct the judge, or give the judge the points that they need to know. But then when you read these reports, when it comes to the part that the doctors have lines that they can fill in,
Right.
For non-medical personnel, sometimes it can be challenging to decipher not just handwriting, but the terminology.
Okay. 1 second. You're listening to Caregiver Reality on 1470 right here on AM in Boca Raton. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask Michelle, we're at 1-888-565-1470, and we'd love to hear from you. And Michelle, I don't want to interrupt any further, so continue on. We just got through doctor's handwriting and trying to understand medical babble.
Right. So after the court does all of that, there's a hearing. And in most of, at least in our state, and I find this to be true across the country from what my counterparts share with me, very rarely will the person who is subject of the guardianship actually be present at that hearing. So when you stop and you think about what's happening, because this is the hearing where, if we're using you, David, as the example, where you may be declared incapacitated. And if you're declared incapacitated, the next step is your rights are going to be removed.
Right.
And think about it. You may not even be there. I mean, that's really an awesome thought when you stop and think about that.
Well, you said that this is a great protection is due process of law. And it's almost as though you can't confront your accuser who's accusing you of being incapacitated. How is it that the court allows that?
Well, so what the law says is that you should be there unless your attorney waives. your presence. Now remember, the court appointed an attorney just for you,
Right.
but more often than not, the attorney waives your presence. And so this is an example of how Florida is progressive, but we could still do better.
Okay.
It would be so much better if we
Had all parties in the room.
Yeah, and if it became, instead of the exception being the person being there, if that became the rule.
Right.
And so when we talk to our colleagues across the state, we always encourage, let's try to get a shift in this paradigm.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's a little
Right.
it's a little.
In your estimation, the attorney representing, in this case, the ward or the incapacitated party, does an attorney waive that because they're concerned that the client may appear to be more incapacitated than they might be, so it's better to make an argument against the paperwork than with the individual there?
Sometimes that may be the reason, but more often than not, it's convenience.
Okay.
It can be difficult to bring what we call an alleged incapacitated person to a hearing. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of times where it's appropriate to waive that presence.
Right.
Obviously, if somebody's in the hospital, in a coma, something of that nature. But just because somebody may be older and feeble,
Right.
that's not a good reason.
No, as a gerontologist, older and feeble doesn't mean that you're incapacitated.
Correct.
You may be a little frail, but...
Correct. So now we're in this courtroom, and let me make another point. This decision or recommendation that's going to be made about your capacity isn't always done by a judge. In certain parts of our state, it's done by a general magistrate. So that, even when you stop and think about, oh my gosh, this is what's happening to me, and then I'm not even going to be before a judge for this, or my attorney's not even going to be
Right,
before a judge.
and for the benefit of the audience, the distinction between a judge and a general magistrate is what?
So a judge can enter orders. A general magistrate can only make recommendations.
Okay.
And let me just say, there are some excellent general magistrates in
So they're
in
really
Florida.
just a finder of facts.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, in certain parts of Florida, Broward County particularly, this will happen in front of a general magistrate. And sometimes, again, if it's not contested,
Right.
the court generally sets aside about 15 minutes for this process.
So in other words, you can lose your rights in 15 minutes.
15 minutes or less.
Wow.
So yeah, it can really be
All right.
challenging.
All right. We're coming up to a break. We've got Michelle Hollister, the president of the National Guardianship Association, managing partner of Solkoff Legal, one of the best elder law firms in the state, not the country. We're here at www.caregiverreality.com, and we're also on WWNN 1470 AM. We'd love to hear from you. Our number is 888-565-1470. We're going to go to a break.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
All right, we're back, and we have with us Michelle Hollister, continuing to explain what guardianship is all about. You got a question? We're at 1-888-565-1470. That's WWNN 1470 AM or caregiverreality.com. Go to live show. Michelle, we'll pick up where we were, and you were commenting on the fact that we had made the distinction between magistrate and judge, and that Broward County, which is just south of where we are, works on the magistrate system. And So Palm Beach works on the judge system. Without talking about personalities, and I don't want to get into that, is there a benefit of one to the other? Does a magistrate that sits and listens to these findings of fact all day long have a more acute expertise or acumen than a judge who may be sitting as a probate judge hearing a whole range of things?
Frankly, they're both equally good.
Okay.
And the general magistrate.
That keeps you out of trouble.
that was a good lawyer answer. The judges are the general magistrates hear more than incapacity determinations as well.
Right.
So they're both. They are equally.
Oh, equally competent?
Thank you for that. Equally competent. So, and we were also talking about the fact that this happens in 15 minutes or less sometimes.
Right.
But after that determination is made, then it becomes even more significant, because the next part is what rights may need to be taken away. So after we find out, yes, you're incapacitated, David.
Right.
What rights are we going to remove?
Okay.
And there's a whole litany of rights that we have that we take for granted. We don't even think about. And here now you're in this court system, and you're being discussed, and people are making decisions in this 15 minutes or less about whether you should retain a driver's license, you should be able to choose your residence, to vote, and there's a whole laundry list.
Right.
And so this is also happening in that short time span.
Let me ask this question. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating, but I know that in the business that I'm in of talking with caregivers, that many of them assume, because they're the children of or the spouse of, that no matter what happens to that loved one, they'll always be in charge. So they don't get around to doing a durable power of attorney or an advanced health care directive. And if you have good durable powers of attorney and advanced health care directives, can you avoid a guardianship if you need to be able to place or detain somebody who may not be fully capacitated?
I would think that we had this conversation before we got on the air tonight, because your timing couldn't be more perfect. Because we're at we're at the point of the process where now the court asks that very question: is there a valid advance directive? And so, absolutely, if somebody took the time to do a durable power of attorney or a healthcare advance directive or both, this is where the court wants to review those documents and to see if they're a sufficient alternative. Guardianship should always be a last resort. We do not want somebody in the guardianship system if they don't have to be.
Okay.
So, yes. Those documents.
So it's control of last resort, for lack of a better way of putting it.
It is. And you want to avoid, for all of the reasons we've spoken about thus far, we want to avoid this process. And so this is a great way to do it, where while you have capacity, you sit down with your lawyer and you choose, not the court, not a judge, a general magistrate doesn't recommend, but you choose who you want to have help you.
Right.
And that's the perfect situation. And everybody over 18, I know that we're talking about senior issues this evening,
right?
But the most important thing for everybody to remember is that everybody over 18 needs these documents. Your parent doesn't automatically get to do this for you just because they're your parent. Your spouse doesn't automatically get to do this for you just because you're married. And the list goes on. You have to take the time to put this in writing.
So that anybody who is of legal age should have durable powers of attorney and advance directives saying who they want to speak on their behalf if something happens to them. They're in a car accident, they get hit by a bus, they have a stroke, whatever it may be. Doing it in advance and being prepared helps you avoid having to have the court make a decision.
Without a doubt. And even though we're an elder law firm, we have more and more clients that are coming in before the children. This is a great time of year to actually talk about this, before the kids go back to college,
Right.
to make sure that all of these documents are in place.
But that's a good point. You know, you can't send your kid off to school, you know, without a good wardrobe and without a durable power of attorney and an advance directive,
Very
so
true.
that it covers their backside in both cases.
There you go.
All right. This is absolutely fascinating. I mean, you know, to think that in a 15-minute period of time, you could have your rights taken away, and in an hour's period of time, with a good elder law attorney, you can insure yourself from ever having that incident happen. Let me ask you this. You know, we always hear about the kids, you know, when we've got a senior citizen or somebody over the age of 65 like me, and the kids decide that my family fortune should be theirs well in advance of me passing it to them. And so we always hear about the fight in court over not so much the will, but who gets to take care of it before it ever gets to you passing away. How often do you find that guardianship issues are contested?
More and more, it seems. It'd be interesting if we had statistics on this, and the entire country is slow in gathering guardianship statistics, although the American Bar Association has a few experts that lead the way in our country in trying to gather them. But anecdotally, we know that there was an increase when the economy changed. People also are feeling an entitlement. Like you mentioned, the children want to protect their inheritance. And for those reasons, I actually want to make a point about the durable power of attorney. Although we always encourage the durable power of attorney as an alternative to guardianship, you should be aware that there are times where people choose guardianship.
Rather than have to pick an individual, they'd rather let the court decide?
Well, not only that, but they want the court oversight because they know how their family may act.
Okay.
They know how their children may tend to be.
Okay.
And so they want court oversight because an important point is with a durable power of attorney, there is no oversight.
Well, that's an excellent point. You know, we're talking with Michelle Hollister, the president of the American Guardianship Association, or National Guardianship Association, excuse me. And if you've got a question for her, 1-888-565-1470. We're on WWW1470 AM and on CareGiverReality.com live. And if you've got a question, we'd love to hear from you. And we're discussing not only the issue of guardianship, but Michelle has raised some very important points that all of us need to recognize, that having those documents, those advance directives, those durable powers of attorney, because we never know when something could happen to us where we're no longer in position to make a decision. And we don't want the healthcare system or the hospital or lawyers or anybody else making those decisions if we have the opportunity to say what we want and what we don't want and who we want making those decisions for us. Would that be a correct overview of what we've been discussing?
Absolutely. Planning.
Planning. It's all about planning. Right. And so, Michelle, if they want to get a hold of you and do some planning, how do we reach you?
Solkoff Legal is located in Delray Beach. And our number is 561-733-4242 or on the web at www.solkoff.com.
All right, so that's a good way to get a hold of Michelle and all of her expertise, but you can't do it early in October because she's going to be in Tampa running the organization. This has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for coming in. It's always a pleasure having you here. I didn't get around to discussing nitromamantine, which I promised last week that I would, but I didn't want to interrupt Michelle, and what she had to say was even more important than probably what I had to say. But it's a very interesting turn in the issue of how we're dealing with dementia, not just Alzheimer's, but any form of degenerative brain disease. Next week, we'll be talking about it very simply. This will be your first lesson in Brain Anatomy 101, but I promise you, you'll understand it and you'll have a much clearer picture of why dementia does what it does and how it acts. And it's no different than planning. If you understand what's going on, then it allows you to make better decisions. And better decisions are what we're all about. Understanding your options and making wiser decisions so that you get the peace of mind that you deserve when you have to make a decision for yourself or somebody else. And so I want to thank you, Michelle, for coming here. And that number for Michelle was 561-733-4242 or Solkoff, Solkoff, legal.com.
Solkoff.com.
Solkoff.com, excuse me. And that's about it for the show, folks. We'll see you next Monday. Have a great and safe July 4th. And Boca Raton, America and the world, it's been great talking to you, and we'll see you next Monday.
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist and non-clinical family caregiving expert. Visit our website at caregiverreality.com and hear and see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have wanted to ask but didn't know where to turn. Tune in again next time for more updates and special guests who bring their caregiving experience to you so that you can deal with your problems and hear how family caregiving is affecting fellow Americans just like you. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, staff, management,